Somewhere north of Toronto, the highways get quieter. The cell bars drop to 1, then to none. Keep driving, and the road itself starts to change. Pavement turns to gravel. Then gravel just stops. Beyond that line, there are towns where the only way in is by float plane. Towns where a train is the only road. Towns where, for a few weeks a year, the only way to reach your neighbors is to drive across a frozen river. Some of these places used to have thousands of people. Now they have a few hundred, or a few dozen, or nobody at all. Today we're counting down 10 of the most isolated, most unusual towns in Ontario. Real places, real history, real people who chose to stay when almost everyone else left. We're talking about a lake drained by hand, a town built inside a single building to survive the cold, and a community so far north its only road exists for a few weeks a year. And by the end of this list, you'll understand why some retirees are quietly moving toward places like this on purpose, not despite the isolation, but because of it. Lower cost of living, far less noise, and a version of Canada that almost nobody driving the 401 ever sees. One quick note before we start. Every town on this list is real and documented, sourced from local history, census data, and news coverage, not campfire stories. Let's start at number 10. Number 10. Moonbeam sits in northeastern Ontario, a small farming town most Canadians have never heard of, until you mention the UFOs. In the 1960s and 70s, this quiet township became a hotspot for reported sightings. Strange lights dropping from the sky, unexplained flashes reflecting off local creeks. Some of it was almost certainly the northern lights. Locals will tell you some of it was not. The town leaned into it completely. Today, Moonbeam bills itself as Canada's Sedona, with a UFO-themed visitor center and a flying saucer on display along Highway 11. It sounds like a novelty roadside stop, and on the surface it is. But the sightings were taken seriously enough at the time to reach UFO research circles internationally. A Northern Ontario researcher named D. McCulley has logged more than 200 reported sightings across the region dating back to 1914, and locals along Moonbeam Creek still swap stories about strange lights over the tree line decades later. Denik Dorval, who works at the visitor center today, puts it simply, the alien mascot isn't meant to be taken literally, it's just part of what makes the town Moonbeam. Here's the part that matters if you're thinking further ahead than a road trip. Moonbeam is a real, working town built on farming and forestry, not tourism gimmicks. Land here costs a fraction of what you'd pay even in mid-sized Ontario towns, property taxes are low, and the pace of life is about as far from a commute and condo lifestyle as this province gets. For someone chasing quiet over convenience and retirement, it's a legitimate option. UFOs entirely optional. Number 9, Punkeydoodles Corners. Somewhere between Kitchener and Stratford, in the farmland where 3 counties meet, there's a crossroads with one of the strangest names in the country, Punkeydoodles Corners. Nobody agrees on where the name came from. The most cited version says a German-speaking innkeeper named John Zurbuchen used to lead tavern guests in singing Yankee Doodle, and his accent turned it into Punkeydoodle. The name stuck to him, then to the crossroads. Other versions blame a pumpkin farmer or an old word for wasting time. Nobody has ever settled it. As roads improved and cars became common, there was no longer a reason for a store on every corner. Farmers started driving into Stratford or Kitchener instead, and one by one the buildings closed or were torn down for cropland. By the mid-1900s, the crossroads had essentially gone back to being an empty field with a name attached to it. Its one truly famous moment came in 1982 when then Prime Minister Joe Clark showed up for the local Canada Day celebration, still remembered locally as the biggest thing to ever happen there. Today, almost nothing is left except the road sign, stolen so often by souvenir hunters that the township eventually gave up replacing it. It's not just a funny footnote either. In 2023, after a fatal crash at the intersection, residents told CTV News they wanted to know how many more people needed to die there before something changed, which pushed the region into a $1 million+ roadwork project completed in 2024. Even the most ordinary, stable-seeming places can be erased, not by disaster, but by the slow drift of habits, highways, and sometimes the roads themselves. We're only 2 towns in, and already we've gone from UFOs in a farming town to a stolen road sign that keeps disappearing no matter how many times the township replaces it. It gets stranger from here. The next entries involve a Lake Canada quietly drained by hand, and a mine where men worked below the actual bottom of Lake Superior, kept alive only by machines that could never be allowed to stop. If a video like this is your kind of rabbit hole, hit like now so more people see it, and subscribe for the rest of this list. Number 1 is going to change how you think about what isolated actually means in this country. Number 8. Cobalt. In the early 1900s, Cobalt was one of the richest silver camps on Earth, and the story of how it was found still gets told 2 different ways. On August 7, 1903, railway contractors James McKinley and Ernest Dara were scouting timber near Long Lake when a pink stain in a rock cut caught their eye. Samples sent to Montreal came back showing an almost unbelievable 4,000 ounces of silver per ton. A few weeks later, a blacksmith named Fred LaRose, sharpening drill steel for the same railway crew, made a second discovery nearby. The popular version, repeated in barrooms and on Wall Street trading floors alike, claimed LaRose spotted a fox, threw his hammer at it, and struck silver by accident. LaRose himself told journalists there was no fox at all. He'd simply been prospecting on his own time. Nobody wanted to print the boring version. The hammer and fox story became the legend anyway, because it sold the idea of a land where anyone with a pick and a wheelbarrow could get rich by luck alone. Within a few years, thousands of prospectors poured in, and Cobalt had electric streetlights and a professional hockey team, while much of rural Canada still read by candlelight. It was a boom town built on a single vein in the ground, and that vein eventually ran dry. When the richest ore was used up and prices fell, and bigger finds opened up further north in Kirkland Lake and Timmins, the population crashed almost as fast as it had grown. Mine shafts were sealed, and the grand hotels that once hosted mining executives from as far as London and New York slowly emptied out. Cobalt never fully disappeared. A few thousand people still live there today, and the old head frames and an excellent mining museum give the town a strange, frozen-in-time feel. Century-old brick homes from the richest years of the Silver Rush now sell for a fraction of what you'd pay almost anywhere else in Ontario. Exactly why a small but steady number of retirees have settled here, not for the silver, but for the history and the price tag. Number 7, Silver Islet. At the very tip of the Sibley Peninsula, jutting into Lake Superior, there's a rock that used to be one of the richest silver mines on the planet. In 1868, a survey crew led by Scottish-born surveyor Thomas McFarlane found pure silver on a tiny outcrop barely the size of a ballroom, sitting almost a mile out into open water. American businessman Alexander Sibley bought the site in 1870 and put engineer William Frew in charge. Frew and his crew of just 34 men worked 18-hour days building a timber breakwater around the vein by hand, essentially constructing an island out of nothing to hold back the lake. At its peak, over 600 people lived here. The mine shafts eventually reached more than 1,200 feet down, below the floor of Lake Superior itself, kept dry only by steam pumps running around the clock. In March 1884, the mine superintendent was confident enough in an incoming coal shipment aboard the steamer H.B. Tuttle, said that he told the miners not to worry. The ship never made it through the ice. Without fuel, the boilers went cold and the pumps ground to a halt. Lake Superior did the rest, rising through the shafts within hours and swallowing the richest silver deposit in the province almost overnight. When the town emptied out, only the former mine captain, James Cross, and his family stayed behind as caretakers. His son Julian was born right there in 1888, 4 years after the flood, and grew up to found the Steep Rock Iron Mine in nearby Attawapiskat. Today, Silver Islet is a tiny summer cottage community clinging to the same rock, with the original company general store still standing. Looking down through the impossibly clear water at the old timber shaft linings still visible below the surface, it's hard not to feel the scale of what one storm took from a town that had, only weeks earlier, seemed unstoppable. 2 mining towns down, one still standing on borrowed time, one lost in a single bad winter storm. But the next 2 entries are about towns people live in right now, in some of the strangest built environments anywhere in the country. Drop a comment telling me which towns so far you'd actually want to visit, or even live in. It helps me pick the next batch of towns for future videos. Number 6, Manitouwadge. Manitouwadge isn't a town that grew naturally. It was designed. In 1953, after a copper and zinc rush in northwestern Ontario, mining companies and the provincial government planned an entire community from scratch, curving suburban streets, cul-de-sacs, a school, a hospital, all dropped directly into the boreal forest. At its peak in the early 1990s, boosted by a nearby gold discovery, close to 4,000 people lived here, with a full school, hospital, and community center built to match. Then the mines closed, one after another, through the 1990s and 2000s. Today, around 2,000 people remain, walking streets, sidewalks, and cul-de-sacs that were engineered for twice that many residents. It's an eerie kind of quiet, a real, fully serviced town with real infrastructure, sized for a population that simply no longer exists. Empty lots sit between occupied homes like missing teeth. But for someone who wants genuine small-town Ontario without small-town prices, that exact gap between built for and lived in translates into some of the most affordable, well-built housing anywhere in the province. Number 5, Hornepayne. This might be the strangest built environment on this entire list, and almost nobody outside Northern Ontario has heard of it. Hornepayne sits close to the geographical center of the province, hundreds of kilometers from anywhere, existing mainly as a crew change point on the Transcontinental Railway. Around 1,000 people live here, and for generations, life has run on the rhythm of freight trains rolling through at all hours. In 1980, the town did something almost nobody else in Canada has ever done. It built a single, massive complex called the Hallmark Centre, and put nearly everything a person could need inside it. The high school, a swimming pool, a gym, a hotel, a library, apartment units, a restaurant, and the local grocery store, all under one roof. The logic was brutally practical. Winters here are severe enough that consolidating everything meant kids could go from their apartment to school to hockey practice to groceries without ever putting on a winter coat. From the outside, it looked almost like a self-contained colony you'd expect to find in Antarctica. The building was eventually declared financially unworkable and mostly closed by around 2010 or 2011, sitting largely vacant for years while various redevelopment plans came and went. It still stands today, a strange, half-empty monument to a town that once solved an entire winter by simply building its way indoors. An entire town crammed into one building because the cold outside was too much to bear. If that surprised you, share this video with someone who thinks they know Ontario. The next two entries get even more extreme. Subscribe now if you haven't already. We're about to head into towns where the pavement runs out for good. Number 4. Pickle Lake. Yes, that's the real name, and yes, the locals are tired of the jokes. Pickle Lake holds a specific and genuinely meaningful title. It's the northernmost community in Ontario you can reach by a paved, year-round provincial highway. Drive nearly 300 kilometers north from Ignace on Highway 599, and this is where the regular road network simply ends. Fewer than 450 people live here today, in a town that started as a gold camp in the late 1920s and whose mines have produced more than 2.5 million ounces of gold since. Beyond Pickle Lake, dozens of First Nations communities exist without any permanent road connection at all, supplied by aircraft year-round or by ice roads bulldozed across frozen lakes and muskeg each winter. Pickle Lake's small airport is the staging point for most of that activity, making this tiny town a real logistical hub for a stretch of wilderness most of us will never see. Pickle Lake is, in a real sense, the last outpost of normal Ontario infrastructure before the province becomes something else entirely. Anyone seriously considering true off-grid living here eventually has to reckon with this exact line on the map. The last gas station, the last cell signal, the last paved road, all in one small town. Number 3. Red Lake. Red Lake is the site of what's often called the last great gold rush in North American history, and it happened astonishingly late. In July 1925, two brothers, Lorne and Ray Howie, found gold under the roots of an overturned tree near the lakeshore. Within months, thousands of prospectors converged on the area by canoe, dog team, and increasingly by aircraft. By 1936, the local bay was reportedly the busiest airport on Earth, with planes taking off and landing every 15 minutes. Red Lake still calls itself the Norseman capital of the world, after the legendary Canadian-built bush plane that became the region's lifeline, with a full-size aircraft on permanent display in the town park. It remains one of the last road-accessible towns in northwestern Ontario. North of here, the map turns into fly-in-only territory, dotted with communities most Ontarians have never heard of. There's an old Ojibwe story behind the name, too. Two warriors encountered a giant moose they believed to be an evil spirit, wounded it, and watched it dive into the lake. The blood that spread through the water gave the lake its name, the color of blood. True or not, the story sits right alongside the more recent history of prospectors, bush planes, and gold. We're down to the final 3, and this is where isolated stops being a figure of speech. From here on, we're talking about towns you cannot drive to, no matter how good your car is or how much time you have. Hit subscribe now. The next 2 towns will put everything else on this list into perspective. Number 2, Moosonee. Moosonee sits on the Moose River, about 19 kilometers south of James Bay, and there are no roads in at all. The only ways to reach it are by aircraft, by boat in summer, or by the Polar Bear Express, a train that runs from Cochrane and takes roughly 5 hours to cover under 300 kilometers of pure boreal wilderness. Step off that train, and the trees are shorter, the light is different, and you've crossed into something close to subarctic Canada, while still technically standing in Ontario. About 1,500 people live here, serving as a service hub for the surrounding Cree communities along the coast. Just across the river is Moose Factory, founded by the Hudson's Bay Company in 1673, the first English-speaking settlement in what is now Ontario. It was captured by the French in 1686, returned to British control by treaty in 1713, and has stood in some form for over 350 years, connected to Moosonee by water taxi in summer and an ice road across the frozen river in winter. In the shoulder seasons, freeze up in the fall, break up in the spring, the ice is too thin to drive on, but too thick for boats to move through safely. For those few weeks, the only practical way across the river is by helicopter. That single detail, more than almost anything else on this list, captures what real isolation actually looks like day to day. Number 1. Attawapiskat. Our final entry is a Cree community on the western coast of James Bay, and it may be the most isolated permanent settlement anywhere in this province. There are no roads to Attawapiskat for most of the year. Access is by aircraft. Full stop. Except for a few weeks each winter, when a temporary ice road is built across frozen muskeg to connect it with neighboring communities. That road is literally named Our Road in Cree. And as winters warm, the season it can safely operate is shrinking year by year. Attawapiskat has made national headlines more than once, most notably in October 2011, when Chief Teresa Spence declared a state of emergency over severe housing shortages, bringing the Red Cross in and forcing a national conversation about living conditions in remote Canadian communities. There have also been drinking water crises and major flooding evacuations in the years since, struggles that reflect just how difficult it is to maintain modern infrastructure in conditions most Southern Canadians will never have to face. But reducing Attawapiskat to its hardships misses the deeper story. This is the traditional homeland of the Mushkegowuk Cree, who have lived along this coast for thousands of years, supported by hunting, trapping, and fishing relationships with the land that predate the idea of Ontario by millennia. It's a place of genuine cultural depth and resilience, not just a headline about hardship. Standing on that shore, looking out at the gray water of James Bay, you understand something the rest of this list has only hinted at. Just how much of this province most Canadians will simply never see, and how much resilience it takes to call the edge of the map home. So there it is, 10 towns, from a UFO tourist stop in the farmland of the South, to a silver rock swallowed whole by Lake Superior, to a town built inside one building to survive the cold, to a community at the true edge of the road network, and finally to a place reachable only by plane, or by a road that only exists for a few weeks each winter. What strikes me looking at all 10 together is how differently isolated can look. Sometimes it's a choice people made 100 years ago and never left. Sometimes it's the slow drift of an economy that quietly moves on. And sometimes, like in Attawapiskat, it's a reality imposed on a community that was there long before any of us, still showing remarkable resilience in spite of it. If you had to actually pick one of these towns to retire to, which would it be? The affordable quiet of Moonbeam or Cobalt, or the true off-grid edge of Pickle Lake? Tell me in the comments, and if this video changed how you picture this province, share it with someone who thinks they already know Ontario. Next time, we're going even further, into the 10 strangest discoveries anyone has ever made in the Canadian wilderness. You won't want to miss that one.